The convent of St. Seraphina stood as a bastion of peace, perched high on a hill surrounded by lush meadows and blooming wildflowers. For centuries, its stone walls had housed women who had dedicated their lives to God, living in solemn harmony and quiet devotion. Within these sacred walls, time seemed to stand still. The soft ringing of the chapel bell marked the hours, and the air was always filled with the faint scent of beeswax candles and freshly cut lilies. But one crisp spring morning, as the sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the chapel, that peace was shattered. It began during the lauds, the morning prayers that greeted the dawn. The nuns knelt in neat rows, their voices rising in soft unison, a hymn that carried their love for God into the heavens. Sister Abigail, a woman of quiet grace and unwavering faith, knelt at the front. Her head was bowed, her hands clasped tightly around her rosary, the beads slipping through her fingers with the rhythm of her whispered prayers. But then, a gasp, sharp and sudden, cut through the harmony. Sister Abigail swayed on her knees, her face pale as parchment, and before anyone could react, she crumpled to the floor. Abigail. Mother Superior Miriam's voice rang out, breaking the sacred stillness. She rushed forward, her black robes sweeping behind her. The other sisters rose in alarm, their murmurs of concern filling the chapel. "Help me carry her," Mother Miriam ordered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her heart. Sister Martha and Sister Beatrice stepped forward, gently lifting the frail woman between them. Her head lolled to the side, her breath shallow but steady. They brought her to the infirmary, a small but tidy room where sunlight filtered through lace curtains. Sister Helena, the youngest of the nuns, brought a damp cloth to cool Sister Abigail's brow, while the others gathered just outside the door, their hands clasped in prayer. "Send for Father Henry," Mother Miriam instructed. "He will know what to do." Father Henry arrived quickly, his face calm and composed as always. He was a familiar figure in the convent, a man of kind words and gentle hands who often tended to their ailments. His arrival usually brought a sense of comfort, but today there was an unease in the air. He examined Sister Abigail carefully, his brow furrowing as he pressed a hand to her wrist, then to her abdomen. The sisters watched from the doorway, their faces pale with worry. Sister Abigail's breathing steadied, and she stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. "Father," she whispered weakly, her voice trembling. I don't understand what's happening to me." Father Henry hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced at Mother Superior, his expression unreadable. "Sister Miriam," he said finally, his voice low, "may I speak with you privately?" Mother Superior's heart sank. She nodded, following him out into the hallway. The other nuns watched them go, their whispers hushed but urgent. In the quiet of the corridor, Father Henry turned to her, his face grave. "Mother Miriam," he began carefully, "Sister Abigail is with child." The words struck her like a thunderclap. For a moment, she could only stare at him, her mind refusing to grasp the meaning. That's impossible," she said at last, her voice barely a whisper. "She has taken the vow of chastity. She is a bride of Christ. How could this be?" "I don't know," Father Henry admitted, "but there is no mistake. She is pregnant." The news spread through the convent like wildfire, despite Mother Miriam's efforts to contain it. Whispers filled the hallways, growing louder with each passing hour. "How could she do this?" Sister Martha said, her voice sharp with accusation. "She broke her vows. She betrayed us." "Don't speak so harshly," Sister Beatrice replied, her voice trembling. What if it wasn't her fault? What if something terrible happened to her? "What are you suggesting?" Sister Martha demanded. "No man comes near this convent, and she would have told us if someone had hurt her." Sister Helena, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "What if it's not something human at all?" She whispered, her wide eyes filled with fear. "What if it's something else? A punishment, or a test from God?" The other sisters fell silent, their minds racing with the possibilities. Mother Miriam, for her part, remained by Sister Abigail's side. The younger woman lay in her bed, her face turned away, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Mother," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I swear to you, I have not broken my vows. I have done nothing wrong. Please believe me." Mother Miriam's heart ached at the sight of her pain. She reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from Sister Abigail's face. "I believe you, my child," she said softly, "but we must find the truth, and we must trust in God's plan, even when it is difficult to understand." The days that followed were heavy with uncertainty. The sisters prayed more fervently than ever, seeking answers in the silence of their cloistered world. But the peace they once knew seemed irreparably broken. The chapel felt colder, the shadows longer, and the faintest creak of the floorboards would send shivers down their spines. Sister Abigail grew quieter with each passing day, her vibrant spirit dimmed by the weight of suspicion and fear. Mother Miriam stayed close, offering what comfort she could, but even she could not quiet the growing dread in her heart. For the first time in years, the convent of St. Seraphina felt less like a sanctuary and more like a place haunted by secrets and shadows. What caused Sister Abigail's condition? Was she telling the truth, or was there a darkness lurking within the sacred walls of the convent, waiting to reveal itself? The peaceful life the sisters had known was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of unease, and somewhere, unseen and unheard, something or someone seemed to be watching. The tension in the convent of St. Seraphina grew heavier with each passing day, like an unseen weight pressing down on every stone, every prayer, and every soul within its walls. It had been weeks since Sister Abigail's pregnancy had come to light, and though the sisters continued their daily routines, an unspoken fear had taken root among them. The chapel no longer felt like a haven of peace. Its holy silence now seemed suffused with shadows and secrets. The unease erupted one evening as the sisters gathered for vespers. Their evening prayers. The chapel was lit by rows of flickering candles, their golden light dancing across the somber faces of the nuns. Sister Beatrice, a kind-hearted and soft-spoken woman who often tended to the convent's garden, knelt in the second row, her rosary clutched tightly in her hands. She had been unusually quiet all day, her cheeks pale and her steps slower than usual. As the hymn rose in harmonious unity, Sister Beatrice swayed on her knees. At first, the sisters thought she was deep in prayer, her head bowed in reverence. But then, her body collapsed forward, her forehead striking the cold stone floor with a dull thud. A gasp rippled through the chapel, followed by chaos. "Beatrice!" Mother Superior Miriam rushed to her side, her voice trembling with alarm. The other sisters gathered around, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. Sister Beatrice's eyelids fluttered open, her breathing shallow. I don't feel well," she murmured weakly, her voice barely audible. "She's burning up," whispered Sister Helena, pressing her hand to Beatrice's clammy forehead. "We must take her to the infirmary." Father Henry was summoned once more. His visits, which had once brought comfort and healing, now seemed to herald only more questions and despair. As he examined Sister Beatrice in the infirmary, the sisters waited anxiously in the corridor, their whispers echoing like ghosts in the silence. When he emerged, his face was pale, and his usual calm demeanor was shaken. Mother Superior stepped forward, her heart already bracing for the worst. She is with child," Father Henry said gravely, his voice barely above a whisper. The air seemed to leave the room all at once. "No," Mother Miriam breathed, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, this cannot be." "I'm afraid there is no doubt," he replied. "Her symptoms are identical to Sister Abigail's. The evidence is clear." When the news reached the other sisters, the unity that had once defined their sisterhood began to fracture. Fear and suspicion spread like a poison through the convent. "How can this happen again?" Sister Martha demanded, her sharp voice cutting through the murmurs. She stood with her arms crossed, her gaze hard and accusatory. "One of us is breaking our vows. There is no other explanation." "No," cried Sister Beatrice, tears streaming down her face. "I have done nothing. I swear it on the Holy Sacrament." Sister Helena, trembling in the corner, spoke up. "What if it's not her fault? What if it's something beyond our understanding? A curse? Or—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Demonic possession." "Demonic possession." Sister Martha scoffed. "Do you hear yourself? You're letting fear make you foolish. And you're letting anger blind you to the truth." Sister Helena shot back, her voice trembling but defiant. Mother Superior slammed her palm down on the table, silencing them. "Enough," she commanded. "This is not the way of the sisterhood. We will not tear one another apart. If we are to uncover the truth, we must do so with prayer, faith, and calm hearts." But the damage was done. The once harmonious convent was now divided, whispers and suspicions festering beneath every interaction. Sisters avoided one another's eyes during prayers. Meals were eaten in strained silence, the warmth of their shared laughter now replaced by a chilling tension. Mother Miriam, burdened with the responsibility of her sister's welfare, wrestled with her own doubts. She had always been the pillar of faith and strength in the convent, but now, even her belief in the sanctity of their lives was being tested. At night, she began to notice strange occurrences. Candles in the chapel flickered and went out, though there was no breeze. The sound of footsteps echoed through the stone halls long after the sisters had retired to their cells. Doors creaked open as if pushed by unseen hands. And then there was the feeling. It came late at night, when the convent was shrouded in darkness and silence. A cold, creeping sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes following her every move. It gnawed at the edges of her sanity, making her question whether the whispers of demonic interference might hold some truth. Desperate for answers, Mother Superior decided to hold a series of private confessionals with each sister. One by one, they came to her office, kneeling before her as she asked them, "Have you broken your vows? Have you seen or heard anything unusual?" Each sister swore her innocence, their voices trembling with sincerity or fear. But no answers emerged, only more questions. With no clear culprit and no explanation for the pregnancies, Mother Superior tightened the convent's rules. "No one is to leave the premises without my explicit permission," she declared. "We will limit contact with outsiders, even the townspeople, and all doors and windows must be locked after Vespers." The sisters obeyed, but the new restrictions only deepened the tension. Some began to wonder if they were being punished, if God Himself was testing their faith. Others whispered in the dark that perhaps they were not alone in the convent after all. "I heard footsteps outside my cell last night," Sister Helena whispered to Sister Beatrice one evening. "But when I opened the door, there was no one there." Sister Beatrice shivered, clutching her rosary. "Sometimes I feel as if something is watching me," she confessed. "Something I cannot see." As the days stretched on, the air in the convent grew heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Was it possible that some unseen force had invaded their sanctuary? The idea seemed absurd, and yet the alternative was even more unthinkable. Mother Superior began to pray longer and harder than ever before, kneeling in the chapel late into the night. "Lord," she whispered, her voice cracking, "reveal the truth to me. If this is your test, give me the strength to endure it. If it is the work of darkness, show me how to cast it out." But the only answer was silence. As the second pregnancy deepened the mystery, the peaceful life the sisters had once known seemed like a distant memory. What was happening in the convent of Street Serafina? Was it the work of man, of God, or of something far more sinister? The truth remained hidden, but the whispers in the dark grew louder with every passing night. The convent of Street Serafina was teetering on the edge of chaos. Tensions that had simmered beneath the surface now boiled over as the unthinkable happened yet again. Sister Eleanor, one of the oldest and most steadfast nuns, collapsed during her morning duties in the kitchen. When she was brought to the infirmary and examined by Father Henry, the same dreadful diagnosis was delivered. Sister Eleanor was pregnant. The news shattered what little remained of the sister's fragile sense of peace. Sister Eleanor was no naive novice. She was a woman who had devoted decades of her life to God, a pillar of faith and resolve. If she too had fallen victim to this mysterious condition, then no one in the convent was safe. For the first time in her long tenure as Mother Superior, Sister Miriam felt utterly powerless. She had prayed, fasted, and sought divine guidance, but the answers would not come. Now, faced with a third pregnancy and a growing sense of dread, she knew she could wait no longer. She had to act. Desperate for answers, Mother Superior wrote a letter to Bishop Gregory, describing the strange and horrifying events unfolding at Street Serafina. She was careful with her words, keeping the tone formal and restrained, but her anguish was clear between the lines. The bishop's reply arrived within 2 days. His solution was unconventional and controversial. Install a hidden surveillance camera in the chapel, where the sisters spent most of their time in prayer. Mother Superior was taken aback. The chapel was sacred ground, a place where the sisters laid their souls bare before God. Invading that sanctity with modern technology felt like a violation, and yet the bishop's reasoning was sound. The truth must come to light, his letter read. Even if it requires measures that are uncomfortable, God sees all, and this will simply allow us to see what he already knows. Reluctantly, she agreed. The camera was installed discreetly behind the altar crucifix, its small lens hidden among the elaborate carvings. Only Mother Superior knew of its presence. Not even the nuns or Father Henry were informed, though she prayed that God would forgive her for the deception. For several days, the camera captured the life of the convent. The nuns carried out their duties, prayed in the chapel, and maintained their solemn routines. Each night, Mother Superior would review the footage, her hands trembling as she pressed play. The recording showed nothing out of the ordinary. The sisters prayed, wept, and sang their hymns with all the devotion she had come to expect. If there was a devil among them, he was well hidden. But then, late one night, Mother Superior was startled awake by a sound that chilled her to the bone. A soft, eerie humming echoing through the stone halls. She lit a lantern and followed the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. The convent was cloaked in darkness, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. The humming grew louder as she approached the chapel. When she pushed open the doors, she saw Sister Helena standing in the center of the room. The young nun's back was to her hands trembling at her sides. She was swaying slightly, her head tilted as if listening to some invisible choir. "Helena," Mother Superior called softly, her voice cutting through the silence. Sister Helena turned slowly, her face pale and her eyes unfocused, as though she were trapped in a waking dream. Her lips quivered, but no words came. "Helena," Mother Superior repeated, stepping closer. "What are you doing here at this hour?" The young nun suddenly collapsed to her knees, clutching her head and sobbing uncontrollably. "It's him," she cried. "I see him in my dreams. Every night, a shadowy figure, watching me, whispering to me. He's here, Mother. He's here in the convent." Mother Superior knelt beside her, her heart breaking for the girl. "Helena, listen to me," she said firmly, gripping her shoulders. "There is no one here but us. You are safe. You are under God's protection." But Helena shook her head, her sobs turning into ragged gasps. "I feel him watching me," she whispered, "even now." Helena's confession sent shockwaves through the convent. The young nun's vivid descriptions of her nightmares, of a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed, whispering incomprehensible words, fueled the growing hysteria among the sisters. Some believed her, convinced that an unholy presence had invaded their sacred home. Others dismissed her as delusional, accusing her of spreading fear and sowing discord. Sister Martha, ever the skeptic, was particularly vocal in her criticism. "Helena is weak," she said coldly. "She's letting her imagination run wild, and now she's infecting the rest of us with her foolishness. Or perhaps she's telling the truth, Sister Beatrice countered, her voice shaking. "You've felt it too, haven't you? That sense of being watched, the strange sounds at night." The convent was descending into chaos, and Mother Superior could feel her grip slipping. She had to know the truth, no matter what it revealed. One night, as Mother Superior reviewed the latest footage from the chapel, her tired eyes caught something that made her blood run cold. At first, the chapel appeared empty, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the pews. But then, at the edge of the frame, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was cloaked in a hooded robe, its face obscured. The figure moved with deliberate, almost predatory grace, pausing near the altar as if listening. Then it turned, looking directly at the hidden camera. Mother Superior froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure's face was still hidden in shadow, but its posture, its movements, they were unmistakably human. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this intruder? How had they entered the chapel undetected? Was it someone from outside? Or worse, someone from within? The footage ended abruptly as the figure disappeared back into the shadows. Mother Superior sat in stunned silence, her hand shaking as she clutched the rosary around her neck. "Dear God," she whispered, "what is happening in this house of yours? Who is the hooded figure? Is it someone from outside, or one of the nuns? Keep watching. Endeavor to like and subscribe if you are yet to." Mother Superior Miriam clutched her rosary so tightly that the wooden beads dug into her palms, leaving faint red marks. The air in the chapel was thick with tension, the only sound the faint, rhythmic breathing of Sister Beatrice, who lay on the cot as bait. The flickering candles cast long shadows on the stone walls, making the space feel more like a tomb than a sanctuary. Sister Martha knelt beside Mother Superior in the shadows, her sharp eyes fixed on the altar. Her hands gripped the handle of the lantern, ready to spring to action. The two women exchanged a brief, wordless glance. Both felt the weight of the moment, a fragile balance between faith and dread. The hours crawled by, each second stretching into eternity, until finally, at the stroke of midnight, the hooded figure emerged. The figure moved with eerie precision, stepping into the pool of candlelight near the altar. The long robe it wore concealed its form, the hood casting its face in deep shadow. It stopped, seeming to assess the room, before moving toward Sister Beatrice. Mother Superior held her breath, her heart pounding in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to act, but she forced herself to wait. She needed to see the truth with her own eyes. The figure knelt beside Sister Beatrice, pulling a small vial from within its robes. It uncorked the vial and poured its contents onto a cloth, then leaned in close to the sleeping nun. As the cloth was raised to Sister Beatrice's face, Mother Superior and Sister Martha sprang from their hiding place, lanterns blazing. "Father Henry." Mother Superior's voice sliced through the heavy silence like a blade. "In the name of God, stop this at once." The figure froze, its hand hovering above Sister Beatrice's face. Slowly, it rose to its feet and turned to face them. With deliberate slowness, it reached up and pulled back its hood. Mother Superior gasped, her breath catching in her throat. It was Father Henry. His face was calm, almost serene, as though he had been caught in the middle of a sacred ritual rather than an act of unspeakable betrayal. The flickering candlelight cast shadows across his features, but his eyes shone with an unnerving conviction. "Father Henry," Mother Superior said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "What are you doing?" For a moment, the priest said nothing. His eyes darted between the two women and the other nuns, who were now sitting up in their cots, their faces pale with shock. Realizing there was no escape, Father Henry slowly lowered the cloth and raised his hands in mock surrender. "Explain yourself," Mother Superior demanded, her voice sharp with righteous fury. Father Henry hesitated, his lips quivering as though he were struggling to form the words. Then, as if a dam had burst, he dropped to his knees and clasped his hands together in a desperate imitation of prayer. It was a divine mission. he cried, his voice shaking with emotion. I had heard the voice of God during my prayers. He told me the convent had grown barren, that the soil of faith had become infertile. He commanded me to help you bear fruit, to bring life into these sacred walls. The nuns gasped, their whispers filling the chapel like the rustle of dry leaves. Bear fruit, Mother Superior repeated, her voice laced with disbelief and disgust. You betrayed your sacred vows, Father. You violated the trust of this holy house. This is not God's will. It is blasphemy. Father Henry's expression twisted into a look of anguished conviction. No, he shouted, his voice echoing through the chapel. You don't understand. The tea, it was necessary. It was how I obeyed the divine command. The tea? Sister Martha asked, her voice trembling. Father Henry nodded, his wide, unblinking eyes locked on Mother Superior. I added a special tincture, a blend of herbs and extracts, to the tea. Just enough to dull your senses and lull you into a deep, peaceful sleep. It's harmless, I swear. It allowed me to carry out the mission without your knowledge, so you wouldn't have to bear the guilt. It was for your own good, God's good. The nuns exchanged horrified glances. Sister Helena clutched her rosary, her knuckles white, while Sister Beatrice stared at Father Henry with a mix of rage and disgust. You drugged our tea, Mother Superior whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. You used our trust, our faith in you, to violate us. It wasn't a violation, Father Henry insisted, his tone disturbingly calm. It was a gift. The tincture relaxed your bodies, ensured you felt no pain. And in the morning, you awoke with no memory of what had happened. It was perfect. It was pure. Mother Superior felt bile rise in her throat. She struggled to maintain her composure, though her hand shook as she gripped her rosary. You dare to call this pure? She spat, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. You desecrated this convent, violated the trust we placed in you, and defiled the sacred vows we hold dear. You will answer for your sins, Father Henry. But the priest seemed unfazed by her condemnation. I only did what God commanded, he murmured, his voice soft and reverent. You'll see. In time you'll see. The children will be a blessing, proof of his will. The room fell into a stunned silence. Father Henry's delusions were so deeply rooted that he saw no fault in his actions, no sin in the monstrous acts he had committed. Sister Helena began to sob, her body trembling as she clutched her rosary to her chest. Sister Beatrice glared at him, her hands balled into fists, while the other nuns sat frozen, their faces pale with shock. Mother Superior stood tall, though her legs felt weak beneath her. She knew that this moment would mark a turning point for the convent. The truth had been revealed, but now a far greater challenge lay before them. What will the nuns do with Father Henry now that the truth is known? Will they risk exposing the scandal to the world, or will they take justice into their own hands to protect the sanctity of the convent? The early morning light filtered weakly through the stained glass windows of the convent chapel, illuminating the faces of the sisters as they gathered for their daily prayers. But the sacred silence of the convent of St. Seraphina was no longer the serene hush of peace. It was a silence heavy with pain, betrayal, and the weight of impossible choices. Mother Superior Miriam stood at the altar, her face a mask of calm she could barely maintain. She clutched her rosary so tightly that the wooden beads pressed deep into her palms. Her heart was in turmoil as she faced the congregation of nuns before her. They looked to her for answers, for leadership, but she herself was drowning in uncertainty. Father Henry's horrifying betrayal had left the convent teetering on the brink of ruin, and now she faced a decision that would change all their lives forever. In her private chamber, Mother Superior agonized over her options. Reporting Father Henry's crimes to the diocese would bring inevitable shame upon the convent, dragging their sacred home into scandal and disgrace. The whispers of the outside world could easily lead to the convent's closure. Where would her sisters go if that happened? What would become of them? But keeping the truth hidden would be an even greater sin. Could she live with herself, knowing she had allowed such darkness to remain buried? Kneeling before the small crucifix on her desk, she clasped her hands tightly in prayer. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Lord, guide me. Protect your daughters and show me the path that will bring us closer to your light. What should I do? Protect your house or seek justice for your children?" The room offered no answers, only the steady flicker of the candlelight and the faint sound of the wind outside. By dawn, Mother Superior had made her choice. With trembling hands, she wrote a letter to the Archbishop. In it, she spared no detail. She included the surveillance footage, the confessions, and her own testimony. She described the full extent of Father Henry's crimes, laying bare the horror that had invaded their sacred walls. Her decision was met with mixed reactions from the sisters. Sister Martha was relieved, her face tight with resolve. "This is the right thing to do," she said, gripping her rosary. "He must answer for his sins, not just to us, but to God and his church." Sister Beatrice, however, was overcome with fear. "If the world finds out," she whispered, her voice cracking, "they'll destroy us. They'll scatter us like ashes in the wind. This convent is all I have. Our home is all we have." Mother Superior placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We must trust in God's will," she said softly, though her heart ached with doubt. "Justice is not ours to withhold." The response from the diocese was swift. A tribunal was convened, and Father Henry was summoned to face the evidence, the footage and testimony. The news devastated the convent. The affected sisters, Sister Abigail, Sister Beatrice, and Sister Eleanor, were shattered by the thought of their children being taken from them. Sister Abigail, who had been a beacon of warmth and joy in the convent, now spent her days in silence, her once bright laughter a distant memory. Sister Beatrice withdrew to the garden, where she planted flowers as a quiet tribute to the child she would never hold. Sister Eleanor, the youngest and most fragile of them all, struggled to find meaning in her prayers, her faith shaken to its core. Mother Superior, though resolute in her decision, carried the heaviest burden of all. She knew she had done what was right, yet the guilt of what had transpired within the walls of her convent weighed on her like a stone. One evening, as she passed Sister Abigail in the corridor, she stopped and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your children are not gone," she whispered. "They will carry your light within them, even if they are far away. Trust in God's plan, even when it is hard to see." The shadow of Father Henry's betrayal hung over the convent like a dark cloud. Though he was gone, the pain he had left behind lingered in every corner, in every whispered prayer. The nuns returned to their routines, but the silence was different now. It was no longer the serene hush of devotion, but the heavy quiet of secrets and grief. Late at night, Mother Superior would sit alone in the chapel, staring at the crucifix above the altar. She often woke in the middle of the night, her ears straining for the sound of faint cries, echoes of the lives that had begun within these walls and were now far beyond her reach. Years later, the convent of St. Seraphina remained a place of serene beauty. Visitors often remarked on the devotion of the sisters and the quiet holiness of the grounds, but some claimed to hear strange occurrences, faint whispers during evening prayers, the sound of footsteps in empty corridors, and the soft cries of children in the dead of night. The sisters dismissed these stories as superstition, but Mother Superior knew better. She carried the truth in her heart, a truth she could never share. Every evening, she knelt before the altar, praying for the souls of the children, for the wounded sisters, and even for Father Henry, though she doubted she could ever find it in her heart to forgive him. In her private chamber, hidden from the world, she kept a small locked box. Inside were the only remnants of the scandal, a copy of the surveillance footage, and a letter from Father Henry, written from his place of isolation. His handwriting was shaky, his words chilling. "I am raising them as you would have wanted. They are my salvation, my proof of redemption. God speaks to me in their laughter. You will see, they are the fruit of divine will." Thanks for watching. Did you think the punishment was right for Father Henry? How heavy was his betrayal? Endeavor to comment, like, subscribe, and share. Watch out for the next related tale as it shows how love defeated injustice for a vulnerable, expectant mother.